Today, I have a treat for you. Every month, over on my Patreon page, every month I put forward a poll, and my patrons, regardless of how much they are pledging, get a chance to vote. At the end of the month, I take whichever of the options they chose, and I make a video/podcast on it. And this time around, the topic that won, the subject the patrons wanted me to talk about in great lengths. This time around, it was the 3 worst writers I ever met in writing class. I know. I try to maintain my content as positive as possible, and this will be a positive video. I'm going to talk about my experiences with those people. I can assure you, you're not as bad as them. These are the 3 most ridiculous writers I ever met, who were so far on the other side of wrong of what made writing effective and impactful that they have become these cautionary tales that I've told my friends, and some of you might have already heard about these in between Let's Plays or random videos over the course of the last 5 years that I've been making content. So I can assure you, this isn't gonna be punching down. There is a lot I want to cover, because these 3 people have resonated across my experience as examples of what not to do. There is a saying in Mexico about something like this: un buen ejemplo de mal ejemplo. It's to have a good example of a bad example. And these 3 writers were that and a little bit more. So, before I go on anywhere with the 3 worst writers I ever met, if you are interested in my content, if you enjoy it, and you would like to get to vote and watch whatever I make a month before it goes live on YouTube, please consider pledging just $1 or more. $1 is all it takes to watch my videos a week in advance, but there are other perks that you can earn. But anyhow, if you want to learn more, go over to patreon.com/mkaren. There will be a link to the poll in the description down below, as well as a link to my Patreon page. And in case you're wondering, I will do a shout out to all of my patrons at the end of this video. Chapter 1: Pictures and Imagination. All the writers that I met in writing class were adults. The classes that I'm talking about were creative writing courses in college. We're not talking about kids I met in high school. We're talking about adults, people, some of them way older, some of them a little on the young side, but regardless of that, I took several of those courses and they all worked pretty much the same. It was a workshop-like environment in which every week you wrote and brought to class 10 double-spaced pages, usually with a little bit of polish unless you outwardly stated that it was a first draft. And you would bring those pages and you would be grouped with 4 other people, usually random, though sometimes you could make a request to the professor, and then you would give each other feedback. You would spend about half of the class going over round-robin style with your feedback on the writing. About half of the class was dedicated to writing and particular exercise. The other half of it was dedicated to feedback. The group would get together and give feedback on last week's writing. So you usually went around round-robin style. Let's say, for instance, that this week you are teamed up with me, and let's say this little figure of a Kirby that I have on my desk. It's you, me, and Kirby. And after the first half of the class is complete, and we have done some writing and learned some stuff about writing, we sit down, we push our chairs together, and then we go round-robin giving each other feedback. For instance, Kirby and you would give me feedback on my piece, then Kirby and I would give you feedback on your writing, and then you and I would give Kirby feedback on their writing. That was the general flow of the class. Why am I establishing this so? Because all these stories took place within classes just like that. And all of these stories took place within feedback session. Now, I know this first chapter is going to be a little bit long, but I want to be very clear with some things. And I also want to provide you chances to learn, opportunities to learn from the bad examples that I experienced, because life is too darn short for you to make all the mistakes. You can learn from other people, and I think that right there is endlessly valuable. So, let me give you a little piece of advice. I would recommend you, whenever you're giving someone feedback on their writing, you should ask them in advance what they're looking for and what kind of feedback they're looking for. I know, because it's worked for me and it's worked for my friends, sometimes when you're in the middle of writing and you're just sharing first draft snippets to your betas or your friends, you really just want encouragement. You want all of the positiveness to push you through a first draft of a story, and that's fine. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. I would encourage you to ask people, and if you want that kind of feedback, you should ask for it. Let them know. Communication is key to all relationships. Additional to that, when it comes for you to give someone feedback, I would recommend you to preface all of your recommendations, notes, or whatever with I. I think this passage here was a little ineffective. I think that the characters' actions in that chapter were unrealistic. I think about this, I thought that. Because people can get lost in the feedback, and there are people out there, there are writers out there who are terrible at disconnecting their opinions from facts. And I mean, sometimes people are just terrible at expressing what they think. That's why practicing communication is very important. You should be able to stop and consider what you're actually telling someone. And you should never, ever just tell somebody that their story sucks. You're a writer. You have a way with words. This is your craft. This is what we do. You have got to have a better way to describe what you think about something or a character or a particular arc or description than just saying it sucks. But again, I don't think any of you are doing that. I assume that if you're the kind of person who reaches out for advice, you're already self-conscious enough that you wouldn't just say something like that. And it also helps to center your feedback on you, because that's what you thought. And honestly, when you are in a group of people that can sometimes be you plus 4 other people, you end up having clashes of opinions, because what I thought was ineffective might be somebody else's favorite piece. And if we don't preface our feedback with it being our opinion on what we think, we can end up going in circles with circular arguments about what's good and what's not, and waste all of that time instead of just giving the person feedback. With that all done and said, let's begin the story. Starting with what may be the most ridiculous writer I have ever met. This is so on the wrong side of what makes sense that it's become an anchor, the foundation to some of my writing advice, to just keep you from being this silly. I don't know if I should do descriptions of the people, because I feel that can easily fall into creating caricatures. Except that this first one is a bit of a caricature, so I don't know. Let's just say, this first guy is an older man. Let's say that he is early 40s. In my mind, I always do kind of imagine him like a real version of Super Mario. Not with the hat and the plumber's uniform and the Italian accent, but just kind of like that vision of that person, except in real life. And before I even had to do feedback with him, I had a feeling that something was up. He was the kind of guy who would make comments during class during the lectures, during the writing portions, I would make kind of, I don't want to say nonsensical, but comments that kind of didn't fit there at all. And thankfully, when I went to the feedback group, I had like 2 other people that I knew. So it was like the 2 of us, 1 more random person, and then that guy. So at least I wasn't alone to experience that madness. So I guess I should set the stage. Imagine me. Imagine around the circle 3 other people, and then this guy. It's been a week since he gave us his packets, because you had to bring physical copies of your work. So it's been a week since he gave us his 10 double-spaced pages, and we had all read them. I will also add the little addendum here that he did not read half of the work that he had been given, but that's okay. That's neither here nor there. As we were doing feedback for someone else, he makes this comment, because one of the people that we were in the group with wrote sci-fi, and this guy, who I feel like I have to give him a nickname. I mean, I guess Mario would be fine. Mario kinda, like, stops the conversation we're having about a particular scene with somebody's writing, because he wanted to talk about why he didn't like science fiction. And his argument, as for why science fiction didn't make sense, didn't involve the hard science of science fiction, didn't involve, the usual trappings, such as, how do you do artificial gravity, or how do you work, cryo chambers, or, cold sleep, people transporting themselves across the darkness of space, the radiation that's outside, the reality that actually bearing children in space is actually impossible. No, it wasn't any of those things. None of those, things that you could, argue about in a forum. His argument was that he didn't like science fiction because, and I am paraphrasing here, but I'm holding quotation fingers, how do you know how to describe a spaceship? Because spaceships don't exist. So how do you describe something that doesn't exist? And it's at this point that I assume a lot of you are answering that question in your heads. You're saying things such as well, that's how description works. Or, well, you can liken it to something else. And after all, how do we describe anything that doesn't actually exist? Because fiction is not real. We are coming up with things, inventing new terms, new worlds, new settings, new faces, new people. And in spite of how meticulous we can be with description, someone might imagine our character to look like something else. Even though we have clearly stated some things, like traits about a particular character's hair or their skin tone, people sometimes imagine them differently in spite of that. That's not inherently a bad thing, but I think that it speaks to the power of imagination. This guy did not get that. We tried to explain that, but he seemed a little stuck in his ways. I guess that's one way of saying it. So that piece of foreshadowing out of the way, we went around the circle until it came time to give him feedback. I don't want to say I had been looking forward to it, because I don't look forward to confrontation. I try to stay as confrontation-free as possible, but it was a sort of thing where I wanted some answers. Because, you see, the story that he turned in, it wasn't inherently bad, or it wasn't ineffective, it didn't have anything offensive in it. If anything, it had a pretty cool, interesting concept. I think it was something about, a pyramid just shows up one day in the middle of LA. And while the story didn't really touch much on that, it was a lot of setting up things, and two seemingly unrelated characters doing different things. It felt a little disconnected. Words. It felt a little disconnected. Yeah. It wasn't anything bad. There were a couple things that like didn't make sense. The parts of his writing that kind of, well, okay, one thing in his writing that stood out like a sore thumb was a particular character's motivation. You have an inspector that shows up to check the pyramid in spite of the pyramid being surrounded by a force field. I'm talking a lot about this story, but that's not actually the fun part of the story. I also don't understand why a plumber would be sent in. Like, we were actually literally talking to him about that. It's like, why did they send a plumber? Also, I know that I said that I imagined him in my head to be like Mario, but I can assure you I'm not being clever about that. I just realized that there was a plumber in his story. And it was a little disjointed, and it didn't go anywhere. And of course, your story doesn't have to have a full arc every 10 pages, but we were left a little bit unsatisfied and confused. Not because of a pyramid that shows up in the middle of LA, not because a plumber had been sent in to fix something in the pyramid, in spite of there being a force field preventing anyone from going into the pyramid that spawned in the middle of Los Angeles. The problem was that there were several pages out of the 10 that didn't have any writing in them. I remember very vividly, I think it was page 4. Page 4, out of the 10 pages he had turned in, page number 4, had a blown out, full page image of actress Salma Hayek. Now, that's how I felt. I remember reading this story, and I arrived to page 4, and I'm like, why is there a blown out picture of Salma Hayek on page 4? Isn't this supposed to have writing in it? Sarcastically enough, one of the people, the person who wasn't a friend of mine, had gotten a version of the packet that did not have that photo, or the rest of the photos. There was an additional photo with an image of Los Angeles. Now, 8 out of those 10 pages actually contained writing. The other 2 had pictures. And when we asked him about it, he's like, hey, Mario, why is there, a picture of Salma Hayek on page 4? To which he replied, oh, that's what my character looks like. That's what my female character looks like. You can't see me, but I'm doing that thing where I'm pointing at the page, as though we were somehow supposed to know that. There wasn't anything on that page that was like, by the way, this is my character's appearance. My character, the main female character, not the plumber, looks like Salma Hayek. It's never explained anywhere, and in the rest of the package that we got, we never get a description for her. I assume now, years later, that the picture of Los Angeles was supposed to be in place of description of what Los Angeles looks like. That was a crazy hour and a half. And I'm glad that I had like 2 other people who I knew who realized how silly the whole situation was. Because I'm not saying it's okay to not turn in what you're supposed to turn in and instead turn in a picture of Salma Hayek. And I'm not saying that it is okay to have a character who just looks like Salma Hayek. I think the particulars of this is like a bunch of knots, and I'm trying to undo them. Why? Why did you do that? Also, why didn't you mention it anywhere? That this is what my character looks like? And why just a picture? And why only like 3 of us got it? The 4th person didn't get the images? It felt silly. And it felt in that sort of way where people are terrible at hiding what they think. People bear on their chests the medals of I want to say their foolishness, but that's not true. The medals of what they really think. We wear them on our chests of the things we believe, and they can see in them. You can see them in our eyes. So, you know, this guy who's been making weird comments in class and who was arguing about how can you describe spaceships when they don't exist. The idea that he would, you know, put in an image of Salma Hayek instead of describing what his character looks like, it didn't seem that far-fetched. It was still crazy. It was still silly. The picture of LA seemed more like that seemed more nonsensical than Salma Hayek, but it's still a sort of thing where, like, years after, you know, no matter the sort of bad feedback that I would get, or negative feedback, or, you know, whenever I felt that my writing was incredibly bad, I could feel myself looking back and thinking, well, at least I'm not filling in my 10 weekly pages with pictures of both my face claims for my characters. That was weird. Especially because he had this story about a pyramid, and it was a little nonsensical, but the concept itself was pretty cool, and his writing wasn't entirely plain. So it seemed to me kind of petty, almost nonsensical, that he would just have a picture to describe a character. Excuse me, leaning back on my chair. It seemed silly. And it resonated with me. And in case you're wondering, that guy did end up eventually leaving the class. I think. And I didn't make this clear because I wanted to focus on his story, but he also gave really, really bad feedback. Not bad as in your story sucks, but he just never gave you anything useful. And he did sometimes say things that were a little bit walking on the edge, up to the point in which everybody I knew in the class, and I knew a lot of the people, basically went to the teacher and said, yeah, don't ever group me with him ever again. So I think it came to the point where, like, he was all by himself, I think. And I know now, as I am describing it, like, I don't want to inspire pity in you, because I feel like that guy... Listen, I don't think I'm cupping my face with my hands, because it's just, I keep thinking back of that image of Salma Hayek just staring into my soul, and I'm like, how does this happen? How does this happen, sir? Anyhow, always describe your characters. Never take shortcuts. If you only have 8 pages this week, just turn in 8 pages. Or just let everybody know that you'll give it to them later. I feel sometimes that if it wasn't laziness, then I don't know. I don't want to touch deeper in there. I don't want to do a psychoanalysis episode live on stream. But describe your characters. And, I mean, sometimes descriptions are not even that important, because I didn't particularly picture that character to look like Salma Hayek, and I didn't think that her looking like Salma Hayek was particularly important to the story. So it's a sort of thing, you know, where, you know, how important is it? And that guy was ready, and excuse the expression, I'm just going to tell you exactly how I felt. That guy seemed ready to die at the cross to protect that picture being there in the 10 pages. Chapter 2. Purple Beyond Belief. So now that you know about Mario, hopefully you're already feeling better about your writing. Because I have a feeling that no matter what you do, no matter how bad a week you have, no matter how awful you feel about your own writing, you're never, ever, ever, ever gonna put up a big picture of Salma Hayek in your manuscript. I am certain of it. No matter how bad you think you are, you would never fall that low. Now, the rest of these stories are not going to be that nonsensical. The third one is going to get back there, but before we get there, I want to give you the second writer. And I realized that I have to give him a name. And I'm realizing now that all these are male, but that may be related. It probably is. It might not be. It's fine. I gave the first one a Mario name, so I think I will give this guy a name with M as well, because that would be funny. And because alliteration. Let's call him Michael. Michael was I'm not using the past tense because he's dead. I'm using the past tense just for the sake of narrative. Michael was a young man. He was about the same age that I was when I met him. So let's say early 20s. I want you to pick... I mean, I guess I have to do the active description, right? Shorter than average. Short black hair. Glasses. And the kind of perpetually angry look on his face. Like a lot of young men, he was a little obsessed with wanting to feel superior. I recognize that now. But back in the day, I just thought he was kind of a bag of, he was not physically intimidating, but he was the kind of guy who would make it a point in his feedback, the way he spoke, and the points that he made, that he felt he was superior to those around him. So you know, a gem. Now let's play a little game. You're all very clever. I know you are. Now, considering that he wasn't particularly physically imposing, and we were in a class about writing, what do you think was his tool of choice to diminish those around him and to elevate himself? I'm gonna give you 3, 2, 1. Did you think, was your answer vocabulary? Michael would blow up his writing. He would explode his pages with synonyms, and I could very much know, I can almost picture the thick block of a thesaurus inside of his backpack. It became almost a recurring joke with my small group of friends about how he would go out of his way to find a synonym that was longer, at least, and I think we even averaged it out, 4.5 syllables, 4.5 syllables. Every replacement had to be long, it had to be obtuse, and it had to be so big and random and obscure that only he knew what it meant. It was a problem. It was the sort of thing, and everybody that I knew had gotten to do feedback with him once at least, and all of us had the same experience of reading his work and not knowing what the heck he was talking about. Now, I want to take a moment to clarify one thing. Vocabulary is a meaningful and important part of a writer. You have to read a lot, to know what people say, to learn a lot, to know how people speak, and to have a large vocabulary to express yourself clearly. That is vital to being a writer. Changing every word in your manuscript to something else just for the sake of making your words bigger, to make that prose purple enough to make you think like you're choking that manuscript, like it's dying in front of our very eyes, that right there, I don't particularly think that is skillful or effective. Forget about being skillful, actually. It wasn't effective. Now, I want to make something clear, because you may be wondering that you may be thinking that I'm taking a very hard stance on this. And maybe not, actually. If you have been following my advice, then you probably already know why I didn't really enjoy being with this guy, or having to do feedback with this guy. Because Michael's writing was obtuse to the point of forcing me and everybody who was doing feedback with him to pull out our phones when we were reading and looking up what the words meant. I think at one point did that actually happen? I think we joked. I think my group of friends and I joked about quite literally copying the manuscript and just like writing over the big words with what they actually meant. It's like, oh, what's that big 5-syllable word? What does that big word mean? Oh, it's just a fancy word for gray. That's all it was. I'm not talking about words that carry particular meanings. Like, for instance, lavender is not the same as purple. Lavender is one particular shade of purple. In this particular instance, the word literally just meant gray. So we have a word that is 5 times as long to give you the exact same answer, which forced everybody in that 5-person feedback group, except for him, to quite literally look up that word. And if you are the sort of person who thinks that blowing up your writing, grabbing a thesaurus and quite literally exchanging every word you can for another word that kind of means the same thing but it's longer, I want you to actually examine what you are doing. Because, and I've said this before, when I go into my writing, I want to make the writing as clear as possible, as well defined as possible, because I want you to picture what I am picturing, or the closest that I can, and make you feel the things that I was feeling, or at least as closely as I can. You lose a lot, and losing your reader is the easiest thing to do. And I can't tell you, I can't tell you. I remember only one thing. I remember a lot. I have pretty good memory. I remember only one thing from his 10 pages. I remember only one image. And it was the image of a hotel lobby. And that little place behind the counter, where with all the little holes and all the little keys and all the little nooks with the names and the tags. I don't even remember if there was a person there. I only remember that because that was the only piece of his writing that was clear enough that I could actually picture it. Because every other time, I would have to pause in the middle of a sentence, grab my phone, or open up my browser and be like, what the hell does this word mean? What is this word? It's just a fancy word for gray? Really? Why didn't you just, I don't know, say gray? And I know the answer. The answer is because he got off on that. He got off on rolling his eyes and saying, what, you don't know that word? You don't know that word? You don't know that one 18th century word that quite literally hasn't been used in forever, as you can tell from the Google graph when you Google that particular word? It never felt genuine. It never felt as though he had actually learned those words. It never felt as though he was doing it to make a point. He was literally just doing it to get off, to feel superior. He was the kind of guy who outwardly stated that what he wanted to get out of writing was respect. And that's silly. That's a waste. Because nobody respects writers. You're better off spending your time doing something else. I don't know, starting a band? I don't know. And it was funny, because it was around that time, and I talked about this in the first episode of my podcast, Omakase, that sometimes someone puts, you've been feeling something your entire life, and someone is able to put it to words in a way that you could have never done so. And suddenly, those feelings that were undefined, unnamed, anonymous, suddenly make sense. And one of those was reading Stephen King's On Writing. There is a segment in the second half of the book, because half of it is memoir, half of it is writing advice. And I would always recommend that book. It is my favorite book on writing. There's a link to it in the description down below. But there's a section where he talks about description and how purple prose, as it is called, purple prose is, at least, in my experience, the instance of thesaurus digging word expanding, syllable multiplying, expanding, blowing out your writing for the sake of appearing deep, mysterious, or insightful. And I forget the exact wording that Stephen King used, but it was something to the extent that if you ever produce in the writing a word so obscure, so dark, so lost, I'm paraphrasing, a word so obscure that your reader cannot infer what it means from the context and is then reduced to opening up a thesaurus or searching for that word to see what it means, you have failed them. You have taken them out of the story, and the story is always king. I have always been keen. I've always been a big fan of John Steinbeck's approach to writing. I am a little biased though because I live exactly where John Steinbeck lived, and I have been to the locations where he wrote a bunch of his books. But there's a quote of John Steinbeck, and I'm paraphrasing again because you know me. I'm recording these as casually as possible. But he said that he wrote for the working person. He wrote so that anyone could understand his stories. And while some have understood that as meaning, that he writes simple stories, to me, I always understood that as I don't write stories for the kind of people who get off on how big their vocabulary is. Wow, that came out way more crimson than I meant. That came out way more strong than I meant. But I've had great examples of horrible examples. I don't ever want to be that guy. I don't ever want to be Michael. That guy, aside from the fact that he was chasing the wrong thing in the wrong place, because I never got the impression that he liked writing. His stories weren't about people. They were about descriptions, about misty rooms. There were things in those rooms. There were things in that lobby of that hotel. I don't remember any of them. The only thing I remember is that counter and that little nook with the little holes where the keys and the tags went. The rest of it, I don't remember anything. It was all a mess of overblown words. I remember more myself sending texts to friends going, "What is this? 3 out of the 5 words in this sentence are nonsense." That I remember. I don't ever want to be that person. I love telling stories, and I am here for the story. Nothing else matters. Nothing else is worth giving up the story for. When I say revise mercilessly, I mean it. Nothing else comes before the story. Not that line that I liked, not the hours that I spent painfully writing the first draft, none of that matters. If it gets in the way of the story, if the story is improved by its removal, then it will be removed. It will be done away with. Because the story rules. The story decides everything else. Because we're here, and the readers will be there for the story. Chapter 3, The Pegasus Knight and the Cliff. So you have heard of a funny guy who put pictures in a book, and a very unhappy guy who got off on how big his vocabulary was. Oh, there's a dirty joke in there somewhere, but I'm not gonna make it. I'm gonna let you all make that joke. The final person. The third worst writer I ever met. This is a mixed bag, because I don't think they were ill-intentioned, but their mistake was a combination of things. And if it hadn't left an impact on me, I wouldn't be talking about him today. And I realized that I have to make up a name for this guy as well. So let's call him Miles. Miles was also my age. Maybe like a year younger. but still early 20s when I met him. Messy brown hair, mismatched clothes, looking a little bit out of place, but always paying attention in class, always doing the task, always reading people's work, and always turning in his writing. Miles was pretty good. Miles didn't do anything that was too crazy until one time I had to do feedback for him. And I remember because this was a smaller group. It was me, another guy, and him. So it's me, another guy, and Miles. I forget how his feedback was that day. I assume it was good, because he gave relatively good feedback. It wasn't anything world-shattering, but he was the kind of guy who, it was a safe bet. Before that day, I would have said to any of my friends in the class that asking for Miles to be in your group was a safe bet. And honestly, he wasn't that bad. I just kind of feel that the writing he handed that day was probably some of his worst. Before that day, I didn't think Miles was that bad. I had heard some things about him, but then again, I heard things about a lot of people, and I am sure there were rumors about me as well. I've always been a bit of a radical when it comes to writing advice, and my own approach to storytelling, so, rumors sort of go around. Big deal. If he writes good, and that's all that matters. So when I sat down to do feedback with Miles, I wasn't expecting it to go bad right away. But it did. What did Miles turn in for writing that week? Now, the following is going to involve a lot of problematic subjects. Actually, just two. And I'm going to tell you right now, here is... Well, one is a disclaimer and the other is a trigger warning. The disclaimer, and I want you to take my hand and follow me through on this. That week, Miles turned in fanfiction. Now, I like fanfiction. I think fanfiction is good. And I think it is thanks to fanfiction that we have so many good works today. It is through their desire in telling stories from a young age or whatever age it is. The desire to tell stories is the most powerful. And anyone who wrote fanfiction when they were young and that inspired them to tell stories later, I will just say this right now. They have already improved on their writing. And that those people who arrived at that class having written years of fanfiction probably knew more about writing than I did. They certainly produced more of it than I had by that point. So we're going to be talking about fanfiction today. It actually doesn't have that much to do with fanfiction, but I have to clarify it and get out of my chest that I don't think fanfiction's bad. And I think that if you read fanfiction, I don't think it's bad. I think it's about how things are handled and the context for the situation. And now for the trigger warning. That particular piece of fanfiction involves suicide. I don't think I'm going to go in great lengths about description and purpose, but I just want to let you know. I'm going to keep things very lighthearted, but, we are dealing about a real and important subject, and one that I am personally familiar with. So it's a sort of thing where I feel that either A, Miles had this coming, or if anything, the fates put the both of us on the same track so that we would have this conversation. Let's take it from the top. Miles turned in fanfiction. And I knew it was fanfiction from the instant I started reading it. Not because it was bad or anything, but rather because there were a couple things that were seemingly not explained, that were going on and not justified. No arguments were made for the possible plot holes involving these particular things. it was Fire Emblem fanfiction. And this is Fire Emblem before Fire Emblem Awakening, so before I started caring about Fire Emblem. But I knew about Fire Emblem because of like the game guides and the magazines, so I knew there were Pegasus Knights in that game. And this particular piece of fanfiction I read that day was fanfiction between one of the Pegasus Knight girls. I don't know their name. I think it's the one from Path of Radiance, but it's fine. By the way, he didn't tell us it was turning in fanfiction. He didn't tell us. I inferred from the girl's description that it was that one Pegasus girl from Path of Radiance, or whichever was the GameCube one, or was she in the Wii version one? I forget. Either way, I inferred it was the Pegasus Knight with the short pink hair, from the description, and it was between her and another character. I appear to have completely forgotten who the other character was. Might be a self-insert, might be another character, doesn't really matter. As I mentioned previously, I have nothing against fanfiction. I like fanfiction, and I think it's a meaningful part of the writing process. Especially to get people into writing. But now, we have to address one of the two elephants in the room. Were we allowed to turn in fanfiction for our weekly work? The answer is maybe. My creative writing teacher, bless her heart, never thought that was gonna be something that was going to happen. I feel that she always assumed that if you're taking the creative writing class, you're gonna be working on your own original projects. So, she didn't know. She didn't know what to do about it, and understandably so, she let it slide. She kind of handed it to us and let us decide whether it was okay or not. And, as I mentioned, I'm okay with fanfiction. I don't mind it. I think it's important. My particular problem is that there's a line between I am handing in this original piece of fiction for you to give me feedback on, and what I feel was Miles' personal fanfiction being turned in as the 10 pages for that week. And that right there was a bit of a problem, because it goes from being the thing you make for yourself, and it gets put next to the other things that are going to get real writing feedback. And I'm not saying that fanfiction is not real writing. It is. But some people make fanfiction entirely for themselves, for their own enjoyment, for what they get out of it. And some other people create it so that others see it. The latter are more open to feedback. Miles was not. Miles was absolutely not open to any sort of feedback, and he didn't disclose that. He didn't make that clear. He didn't tell us it was fanfiction. So when me and the other guy are doing our thing, the thing that we're there for, the thing that we paid money to go to college to do, he didn't take it very well. And we didn't tear his writing apart, but, and I have to make this clear, I knew it was fanfiction, because I could tell. The other guy didn't. So the other guy was going in, hashtag going in with the writing feedback, and he was like, how do the Pegasus Knights work? Like, what's the lore behind that? How the guy had no clue. It was Fire Emblem fanfiction. He had no clue that there was no lore. And he thought that Miles had come up with something really cool and interesting, like Pegasus Knights. People who ride Pegasus. That is so cool. How do they work? How did you come up with it? And he had no clue. No clue. No clue whatsoever. So you already know that we are 3 steps down into the portal of hell, and we're going down there real fast. The steps become real smooth. It's just a ramp at one point. And I love that I'm already dying. I'm already, like, not having a panic attack, but I'm having the dreadful feeling of that one evening giving writing feedback to Miles. Because it's my job. We're expected to treat each other's writing seriously, and he turned in what was clearly personal writing. Writing that he did not mean to ever improve on or revise, writing that he never intended to have anybody else see, but he gave us, whether out of laziness or because he just thought he wanted someone else to look at it, I don't know, but it wasn't his best work. And unfortunately, the core of the story surrounded around the side character who wasn't the Pegasus girl, who might have been a self-insert. Is that my cat in the background? Yenta? I have headphones on, so I don't know if I keep hearing meowing. It's probably my cat. Anyhow, Yenta's here to lighten up the mood. Yenta's here to give us some well-earned respite before we jump into suicide. The story was about suicide. The story was about self-insert / what may have been another character from Fire Emblem. I'm not saying it was a self-insert. I don't know. Because I don't know Path of Radiance. Like, I only care about Fire Emblem Awakening and a little bit about Fates. A lot about Fates. Okay, I care about Fates. But, so, like, I don't know who the characters were. I only know the Pegasus girl, okay? So, we were having that uncomfortable situation where I'm like, is he writing about his own feelings? Is this a self-insert? Because the story was about suicide. And it was those really unfortunate depictions of suicide where it becomes romanticized, and there was a lot of flowery language, and it was just like the most uncomfortable place I had ever been in a writing feedback session. And I'm not saying, because I didn't sign up for that, because that's unfair. I don't know what he was dealing with. I'm going to tell you right now, because I feel like I have to get this out of my chest. I am pretty certain that Miles himself was not dealing with anything in particular. I don't think he was having suicidal thoughts. I felt from the way that the descriptions were and the way that the story was set up with the Pegasus girl coming in to save and having to beg the other character to not commit suicide, it felt like it was gratuitous for the sake of gratuity, for the sake of shock. I didn't get the feeling that Miles was going through anything in particular and was using the writing as a way to escape. I didn't get that. I didn't get it. The other person didn't get it either. But the other person and I, we had both dealt with suicides in the family. So both of us had very strong feelings about the depiction of suicide in this particular piece. And the way the narration handled it, which was badly, the way the characters were handling it, and there were also a bunch of logical fallacies. A couple of things didn't make sense in this story as well. Now, this one I remember vividly. One, because Miles wrote the story, at least in a way in which it could be followed. Like, I remember some of the pyramid and the force field in LA. I remember nothing that freaking Michael wrote. Was it Michael? What did I name him? Michael? I remember a lot of Miles' writing. I remember a lot of that scene. I remember a lot of the Pegasus girl begging. And the worst part is that, like, I never felt that it was genuine. I never felt like, oh wow, this is a very meaningful and important moment. It just felt like it was gratuitous. And maybe that's a little bit of my own color, because I've dealt with stuff like that. So it's a sort of thing where I'm like, listen, Miles, it's not glamorous. It's not pretty. It's not cool. I guess, yeah, that was the most uncomfortable writing experience I've ever had. Not only because I felt at odds with what my duty was as a writer. You gave me feedback on my writing. I have to give you feedback on your writing, and I have to treat it seriously, and I have to do my job. And I always showed up, and I always put in the time. Because this is what I love the most. I take writing seriously, and you took this writing class. So I treated his piece of shock value, gratuitous fanfiction, and I tried to be level-headed, and I tried to give him the best feedback. but I knew that he didn't turn in that piece for feedback. And he reacted very badly. And it was funny. Of course it was funny. It was funny when I talked with my professor about it afterwards. And I'm like, I can say her name, Marcy. Damn. Oh, wow, they all have names with M. That's hilarious. I'm like, Marcy, what the heck was up with that guy's writing? What the heck is up? Does he need help? And Marcy was like, oh, no, I don't think so. But yeah, it was weird. I love Marcy. Bless her heart. She was like, okay, I know that when I say, I just don't get it. Like, I don't want you to picture, like, a 20-year-old thing. Because Marcy was older, wiser. And she knew what she was talking about. And I believed that from the core of her heart, when, after talking, she's like, yeah, I didn't get it. What was the story supposed to be about? Was it about suicide? No, it actually wasn't. Was it about the romantic struggle between Pegasus Girl? Oh, I should clarify, Pegasus Night Girl. That would have been a different story. Pegasus Night Girl and whoever the other guy was? No. What was the point of all that? What was the story about? What did Miles want the reader to take from it? He didn't want anything. He didn't want the reader to take anything from it. Because it wasn't for the reader. It was for him. And that's not inherently a bad thing. That's not, I don't want you to write fanfiction for yourself. But I feel that that particular time for me, it felt another reminder of dedication to what you're wanting to do. And I don't know, I feel that if Miles really didn't have anything to turn in, he should have just not turned in anything. The creative writing class, like, we weren't being judged on the quality of our writing. The goal was to, like, you could actually still get an A in class if you completed the very final assignment, which was a compilation of a bunch of your writing. Like, there are ways you didn't have to, do that. And also, there was a lot of uninvited baggage that came into the story. I would also like to inspire you that if you ever hand out your writing to someone, I would urge you to make it clear what it's about. Because I didn't sign up for suicide when I, got handed that particular piece of writing. I didn't sign up for that. Not to say that I wouldn't have read it, but I like to know things in advance. It's important for your beta readers to know what they're going in for. Not only for the things that might put them on edge, or the things that might, make them feel bad, but also so that they can prepare themselves. This story is about this, and this is what happens in this story. Or not even that, you can just be like, hey, these elements are present in the story. But no, that didn't happen. And I forget, because I remember Mario didn't come back. Michael didn't come back. I think Miles came back. I think Miles stuck around in the class for one more semester. I think so. I mean, Mario left like halfway through the semester, so Miles stuck all the way through. Some people really like his purple prose, but there were the same kind of guys who were like, oh yes, oh you don't know that word? What do you mean you don't know the word purpulescent? I just made that up. I don't know what purpulescent mean. I guess it would mean to shine like the color purple, but that's silly. Why were these three the worst writers I ever met? Mario and Michael are pretty straightforward. Like, there's a very clear, well-defined line. But Miles got to me. Because it was an amalgamation of things. Mario and Michael, like, those were straightforward things. It's like, if you weren't this way, your stories would be so much more effective. If you didn't have this obsession with getting off on feeling superior, you would be so much more, you would tell so much more effective stories. And good stories. Because I don't think that a bad writer is a bad writer forever, because ultimately, this is the craft of telling stories, of weaving words and characters, places and actions and things into an array of events, stories that rise and fall and rise, take us to places we never knew, and places we have always known. Of course, you can always improve on that. You should always improve on that. You should always be open to learning more about yourself and your craft, becoming better every single day, every single chance you got. That is part of the process. Even those terrible writers I met could still improve. Their shortcomings were shortcomings of themselves, things exterior to their writing. The mechanical act of writing, the mechanical act of laying down words one after the other. That wasn't at fault. And they were so far on the other side of the line between good and bad writing that they're almost caricatures. Miles is the one that is kind of real still to me, because it's such an amalgamation of problems. Not turning in what he was supposed to turn in. Turning in something that he didn't really want to get feedback on anyway. He didn't make any of that clear. Didn't tell us any of that. And you know, communication is key to all relationships. So when me and the other guy show up, ready to give him, you know, what we truly thought on this piece, while being, you know, civil. And, you know, of course, he had to be in a group with the other two people in the classroom who have had experience with suicide. You know, sometimes life gives you a wake-up call. His writing wasn't inherently bad. I remember more of it than I do of the other guys. But it was gratuitous. It was handling a particularly delicate subject with no grace, using it for the sake of shock. And you know me. It's not that you can't have stories that have those things, or stories about those things. It's about how you handle things, and ultimately the message that you're putting forward. His message was that suicide wasn't a bad thing. And again, I asked Marcy, and she, like, talked to him, and, like, apparently he was fine. That's why I'm comfortable talking about it, because I know he was okay. He was just quite literally writing it for the sake of how shocking it would be. I guess he wanted to see if he could write a story like that. Was it effective? No. I would like to inspire you to handle topics like that. Take them. Talk about them. But be mindful of what you're saying and your handling of it. It's not bad for you to hold the baby. You can hold the baby. Just don't throw it, smack it onto the ground, swing it around, you know, like a bat. Don't do that. You can hold the baby. It's just about how you handle the baby. Does that metaphor work? I feel like it works. See, the topic of suicide is a lot like babies. Like the baby. Did that make sense? I hope it made sense. It's just weird. I usually don't talk about my experiences with people. But, I mean, in case you're wondering, Mario, Michael, and Miles were not called any of those things. I haven't seen those people. I haven't heard of anybody who heard about them. For all I know, they are figments of my imagination. I said pigments? I said figments. Well, that's a phrase that I never thought about. Is it pigment or figment? I'm thinking about this way too hard. I've been recording for about an hour and a half right now. But I want to say this. Ultimately, the lesson I'm putting forward today, in regards to all these bad writers I met, like I said before, these are not world-ending, shattering failures. This is not, like, I don't think all the three people here were not for their own personal, the things that are external to their writing. If it weren't for their own shortcomings, their stories would have been better. And I'm not saying that you have to overcome your own shortcomings to become a better writer, but it's the reality that, you know, Michael didn't care about writing. He just wanted to feel big and tough. You want to feel better than other people. And I feel that, Miles wrote something for himself and didn't think twice about what he was handing out to people. That's no sin. I was dreading talking about Miles. I knew I was gonna dread talking about Miles, mostly because, Mario and Michael, they're both silly. They're ridiculous. There's a little bit of silliness. There's a little bit of silliness in that Miles just turns in fanfiction. And I know, we treated it way too seriously. That other guy was sold. He was so sold on it. He wanted to know more about the Pegasus Knights. And that was a little sad. But like, it's the sort of thing where, like, it was silly. I just wish that it hadn't been... Like, I feel like if that story hadn't also been... If it hadn't been fanfiction that no one asked for, no one knew they were going into, if that had been just that, I wouldn't remember this story. And I wouldn't make it a point to tell you about it. But if it also hadn't involved a whole awful management of the topic that is suicide... compounding shortcomings, mistakes, failures, oversights. I want to inspire you to be merciless with your writing. And when you reach to other people for feedback, you should tell them what they're getting into and what you want out of them. Hey, I want to know what you thought about this. Hey, I want to know what you thought about that. Hey, I'm not comfortable with my character. I am feeling uncomfortable with descriptions. Can you tell me how well I handled them? Like, if I feel that I'm not describing my character accurately, maybe I don't have to post an image of Salma Hayek on there. If you feel insecure about your vocabulary, ask people about it. It's generally not a problem. Because if you're a writer, you're consuming media, you're recognizing language, you're reading books, you're playing games, you're watching movies, you're catching what people are saying, consuming media. Your vocabulary grows with everything you consume. I don't think it would be a problem. And if you handled, if you have to handle the baby, if you have to handle sensitive topics, do it with respect, be careful, and let your feedbackers know about it. Let your betas know what they're getting into. Now that was a comedy of errors. Oof. I just want to know. I just want to know about these Pegasus Knights. How do they work? Can she, like, communicate with the Pegasus? Do they have, like, a mind link? That was so bad. That was so bad. Oh, this poor guy, he had no idea. Okay. When I was thinking on the stories that I wanted to talk about for today, I mean, I have known other bad writers, but these are like the pinnacles. This is like in the years, and all the years I took creative writing courses in college, these were the three worst. Yeah, there were the usual people who didn't give good feedback. The people who, said your story sucked instead of, actually phrasing it like it is. Because things don't suck. I think people get too focused on their own opinion and the importance of their own opinion that they overlook the reality that even if it is their opinions are fallible, and opinions can be established on truths, lies, falsehoods, and misconceptions. Oh my god, I just dropped the biggest truth. Oh, that was strong. Someone clip that. Someone quote me. Someone add me on Twitter with that quote. That was a good line. Sometimes I say really clever things, I think. Sometimes. Not all the time, though. Oof. I mean, listen, if I record a 1 hour and a half podcast, I'm bound to say at least 2 good lines. Feel free to add me on Twitter at Mr. Karen with that good quote. But it's true, though. Sometimes we get lost in our own opinions, that we overlook the fact that, they might be based on falsehoods. But in spite of that, I knew bad people, and I knew bad feedbackers and bad betas, but they weren't ridiculous. They weren't actively hurting their own fiction with their pride, or handling very sensitive subjects close to my heart horribly. And there are more. Mostly lesser bad writers. Like that one girl who didn't believe in editing. That was weird. That was weird. And these are the 3 worst writers I ever met. Some strange, some lost in their own pride, and one a comedy of errors, compounded errors, and lack of foresight. I know for a fact that you are better than all of these 3 writers. No matter how bad you think you are, I am certain that at least if you've made it all the way to the end, you will be able to handle writing better. Because life is too short for you to make all the mistakes. You can learn from these people. Though, let's be real, like, there isn't much to learn from the first guy. That was just weird, Jesus. I'm not joking, by the way. My friends and I still make fun of that guy. Like, you know, for as weird as those 2 hours were sitting doing feedback with him, I've gotten like years worth of laughter out of just bringing it up. You know, like sometimes I'm just talking with a friend, with Kitty, and I'm just like, oh, do you think I should just stick a picture of Salma Hayek on this page? Instead of a cliffhanger, just stick a big image of Salma Hayek's face on it. And now you know. Now there's like a whole hundreds, thousands of people who know this dumb inside joke now. Now you know. Oh my god. Please, I beg you, do not send me images of Salma Hayek, please. I beg you. Oh my god. It could be that sort of dumb thing where like 10 years from now, this podcast is still up, and someone is like, oh, time to send Max at Mr. Karen some pictures of Salma Hayek. You're better than this. You're better than doing that. Don't do that, though. Don't add me on Twitter with pictures of Salma Hayek. Don't add me and Salma Hayek. That sounds like a bad idea. People are gonna think that I like Salma Hayek. That sounds like a terrible... I wish he had... That's so random, too. Man, that was a weird guy. But you're better than that, though. You, just from the fact that you're opening to learning about writing, and that you understand that there has to be other ways of doing things. They may be better, they may be worse, but you can learn from all of them. Learn from the bad, learn from the good, and find your own way. Okay? Okay. Hi there. My name is Bex, also known as MKaren, and this video here is brought to you thanks to all of my patrons. Patreon.com/MKaren is the #1 way to support me and what I do. By pledging just $1 just $1 a month, you get to watch all of my videos and listen to my podcasts a week before they go live on YouTube. And depending on what tier you decide to go with, you can gain cool perks like copies of my books, access to my secret monthly zine full of writing prompts and inspirations, and of course, get shoutouts. On the usual podcasts, I split up the shoutouts depending on the tiers, but today, because it's the Patreon monthly video, and it's for all of my patrons, everybody gets shouted in the same category, because you are all awesome, and you're all making this possible. So, without any more further ado, I would like to formally apologize to all of the people whose names are about to be butchered, and in alphabetical order, as sorted on Patreon, I would like to give a big thank you to all of my patrons, starting with A. Howard, Atalak, Alisa Dudley, Amanda Stevens, Amelia, Amy Palmer, Angela, Aniexo Hoshi, Biting the Sun, oh, here comes everybody's favorite, Blarg, Brenda, C.E. Richards, Caitlin, Cannibal Lily, Cariad Eccleston, Kathy Lindsay. Actually, take 2, I think that's Lindsay. Kathy Lindsay. By the way, that's not a take 2. I don't do edits in this sections. You get raw max. Just raw footage of me stumbling on my words. Christine Dennis, Kristen Lofton, Citro. Clem Pastor. Oh my god, one day Carissa's gonna tell me that I've been pronouncing their name wrong. Carissa Glasshin. Dwayne Jackson. Eleanor. Erasos. Joffrey. Harriet H. Heather Tusker. Irina Phoenix. Juan Netz. Janosch Heibutsky. No one has told me that I get that one wrong. No one has told me that I pronounce it wrong. I'm gonna assume I nailed it. Jeffrey James William. Joe. Juan Nunes. K.M. Anderson. Oh no, it's this one. Kameshwar Rao Shaluri. That one's wrong. Now listen. Some I get right. That one I know. That one's wrong. There's no way that's right. Kylie. Veli. Kelly Vermillion. That's my dyslexia. If I ever just say something wrong, like super wrong, it's my dyslexia. I have dyslexia. I don't think I've ever clarified that. Or I haven't made a video with me talking about that. My brain just autocorrected and transposed the V of Vermilion on the K for Kelly, so it became Veli Carmeleon. Carmeleon, of course, also the name of my favorite Pokemon. Keel. Kit Lee. Lear Kilo. Lisa Effa. Lucky. Marco Locatelli. Mark Maruska. Mars Adley. Mary Foster Smith. Nicola. Nicole Grissom. Noam Sohar. Novels and Tomes. Pablo. Pat Eichson. Rain Misoa. Raquel Fernandez. Roa. Shimmer Tales. Sky D. White. Soul Muse. Sylvia Lightla. Lightla? Lightla? Lightila? Oh my god, I said Lightila. Should I just say it with like... Because, listen, I'm either reading names in like my English accent or my American accent, or I'm reading them in my Spanish voice. So, like, listen, I only have two modes. I come pre-installed with English voice, which is this, and my Spanish voice, que es esta. So, it's either Sylvia Lightila, or it's Sylvia Lightila. Sylvia. The problem is that Sylvia has a Y in it. You know, this sort of thing. I'm like, is that a Spanish last name? I don't know. Is it Spanish? I could look it up right now, but I won't. No corrections. We do it live. Sylvia Lightila, Synexia, Thomas Baker, and last but by no means least, Wendy Christopher. Thank you guys for your support. I hope I didn't butcher your names horribly today, except for Kameshwar. Kameshwar? Is it Kameshwar? Yeah, except for Kameshwar. Your name's getting butchered every time. That name is getting butchered every... There's no way your name is Kameshwar. There's no way I'm pronouncing it right. There is no way I'm pronouncing that name right. Anyhow, hi there everybody. Max here. Welcome. Welcome to the end screen. I want to thank you all for your support. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of your day with me. Reminder again that there is a link in the description down below to the new poll. If you want to vote on it, pledge $1 right now. It helps a lot. It's way more than I would get from YouTube advertising alone. But anyhow, I'm gonna get out of here. And whatever you do, no matter how stressed out you are on the last day before you have that assignment due, do not insert big blown out pixelated images of Salma Hayek's face.